Malo ni tato e a mai la, ko humai anō ki te whare, hoki mai anō ki te puni I pāho. Ko tahi te kaupapa, he manaaki I tēnei reo ātāhua, ko te reo Māori. If you've listened all the way through to Epi 9, you'll be able to manage almost all of that. Except for a little of my ngana toke lao, which I'm learning at the moment and taking every opportunity I can to use. So well done. You know us, it's Ari and Vini, and we're on a journey through life uncovering how we as a whānau can reach our wawata, our dreams, for language within the home. I have to be honest, I was worried about doing an episode based on research and academic scholarship. As Māori and Indigenous peoples, we are pretty over-researched by academics, often for malicious or immoral purposes. We have an understandable distrust for research. On the other hand, so many academics are working in multilingual and Indigenous language spaces, and I feel it wouldn't be genuine for me to do this series without talking to you, our people, about the things you deserve to hear about. So this is our attempt, and I hope we've done okay. In this epi, we're making one more little adjustment to our no mai phrase. No mai ki tēnei whare rangahau. Welcome to this research house. Yep, you can add stuff to whare in a metaphoric sense. Try these out in your next hui. No mai ki tēnei whare kōrero. Kuhu mai ki tēnei whare wānanga. You'll also hear he aha or whakaaro. What do you think? This builds on our other sentence types that are similar. He aha te wawata. What's the dream? He aha te mate. What's the problem? He aha te whakaaro. What's the thought? He aha o whakaaro. What are your thoughts? Right, that's enough. Playtime is over. Let's jump into our whare rangahau and get into class on tūkapu tu kōrero. Kia ora.
Kia ora. How do you feel now that we're at episode 9 of 10?
I feel good that we are really starting to get our kōrero out. And I'm excited. We're getting to the point people are going to see it, hear it soon, and that's really exciting too. Kia ho whakaaro.
I feel like I've got gradually more comfortable with the whole process, and I can definitely tell in the earlier episodes how nervous I was. But yeah, it's been a journey.
It's been a dream. Well, I think well done to us, and I'm excited to crack into this episode, which you're going to drive for us. Yes. So for all our people at home, it's not no mai ki tēnei whare anymore, it's no mai ki tēnei whare rangahau. Welcome to this research house.
Yes.
Because that is our kaupapa for the day.
With Dr. Vincent Olsen reading.
Yeah, it feels a bit weird. It feels a bit weird taking on that mantle today because I'm used to you being my partner, and today we're going to have very nerdy conversations.
Question 1.
Is this a question or a comment? Because academics at conferences, they say they have a question, but it's a comment.
We'll find out. It's for you to decide, Doctor. How come so many people are taking classes, but we're not reviving Māori?
Such a good question. There are two really important parts to that, and maybe we'll talk about the second part soon, which is, are we reviving te reo Māori or not? Is it still a dead language or not? So we can talk about that as a second part. A lot of us in Aotearoa are really convinced that classes are the only way to acquire a language, and so we hear a lot, it's everywhere. Everyone at home will have had this thought, I've had it, you might have had it too, is I've got no time for te reo Māori because I need to take a class, so when things free up I'll do it. But there's problematic parts to classes too, and so in language, lots of language research, when you go looking for, like if you were to Google things about authentic classroom environments, and you know, the fancy word that we use is language teaching pedagogy, but it's really just how you teach in a classroom. and how you transmit a language and what kind of things do you do there. When you go reading that literature, a lot of it, like, academics are sort of struggling with classrooms as really good places to pass language on. And so while they are definitely a part of learning, there's this other camp of people, academics, who are saying, well, actually classrooms are not that authentic. Like, you know, when you go into a classroom, everything's concocted. Nothing's that real. Like, you've all been put there under the mantle of a kaiako, a teacher who's got rules, and they're guiding your language progression. They're concocting, you know, sort of fake things to talk about because they're not real. And so that's a tough thing to get past, is if none of these classroom contexts are authentic. And if that's the case here, like, we all go to language classes and none of this is authentic, how is it going to escape and become part of real life that is always authentic? So that's a really hard thing, and I think that's partly why we talk about, like, everyone's going to classes. Every fella in his kuri is in a class at the moment. But are we actually speaking Māori outside of the classroom? Is it making it outside the classroom? Not always. And part of that is it real? Like, is a classroom ever real? Is it authentic? Is it genuine? And that's something that academics still yelling about in journal articles.
What makes a good classroom? Like, do you have to research different providers, different kaiako, to see what might be relevant to you or their experience or something? Is it just by chance if you have a really good experience and then happen to be able to speak it afterwards outside of the room? Like, what are the things that you think about?
That is an amazing question. If I was looking for a class and I had a range of choices like you do for Te Reo Māori, I would be really trying to understand how I learn. And a lot of us think we know, but we don't really know. So it might be if you have a particular language anxiety around exams, you don't do a class where there's an exam. You need to go to a class where there are no assessments. You know what I mean? Yeah, super common. And a lot of people will enroll in a class like that anyway, and then get these feelings of anxiety, but will churn them out in their minds as language trauma. But that's not really language trauma, in as much as it's the classroom setting wasn't quite right. So that's one big thing that I would do, is I would I would really put effort into trying to think, how do I actually learn a language? And it's probably not what you think at the outset, so really dive deep into that. And then the second thing I would look for, if I had a choice of, you know, learning settings, is the content. Like, is it actually relevant to my life? And some of the best teachers that I've had are ones that sense very early on what the actual humans in the room are like, and then they tailor the class straight away. So it actually becomes functional, it actually becomes meaningful, it actually becomes something you take home. Not everyone gets that ability, because sometimes there's only one class to go to, and if you want to go, you got to go to that one. But yeah, those are some things I'd look for.
Would you say a class is better than no class?
If you've got the time and the ability to not start resenting the reo because you're making time for the class, yep. So if you are someone who actually has the opportunity to go to one and you're not going to resent it, a lot of people do, you know, because they've freed up time for reo, but they're losing out on other things, and the things they lose out on are mostly like self-care, you know. So it's like, oh, I used to sit down and read a book, but now I can't because I've got to go to class. Or I used to go and see my family, but now I can't because I've got to go to class. Or I used to, you know, go for out with my friends and they start like resenting the language a little bit. Those are people where I would say, nah, you don't have to acquire language in a classroom all the time. You can do it other ways, like language planning, you know, where you're not actually carving out more new time for reo. You're taking some aspect of your life and making it te reo Māori based. So yeah, if you're able to, you know, if you've got all that lined up. I mean, go
back to the first question, because I remember you said that there was two parts to it. So I went on my own buzz.
No,
with that one.
this is great because
It
I'd
just
forgotten.
sparked more questions.
No, you're great.
So we talked about people taking classes but not reviving Māori. And you mentioned something about the language dying. Is there any research to say yes, that's true, or no, that's an absolute lie?
Yeah, there's like this strange thing that happens in the literature and in research and in scholarly articles, where I think there's a bit of a disjunction around the language that they use in their articles and what feeds out into the public. And so there are still people who write about language death, te reo Māori is dying, in their academic work, and I don't actually personally believe that's true, but it kind of feeds out into the public that it's still dying.
Is it fed up by a certain type of people?
Yeah,
okay,
it is
interesting.
a certain type of person, and there is a certain kind of there's a certain kind of non-Māori academic that really love to push that kind of message out because it gets them what they want, politically. And then there's a certain kind of Māori scholar as well who, they really cling to that message of death, and I'm not too sure why. I think that there is something in there that makes them feel like if they keep pushing the message, then people will stop being complacent around the language. I think that's where they head is. If I keep saying that it's dying, then people will go, oh, and it'll be that shock, horror, surprise, and then the rush to do something. It's meant to be like a call to action. But the truth of it is, in my academic view anyway, the truth of it is that te reo Māori is not dying. It's not going anywhere. It's never going to disappear. It's never going to reach a point of, when a linguist would describe a language as dead, which is, most linguists anyway, will tell you that a language is dead when it has no speakers or when it has one speaker. And that's because that one speaker doesn't have anybody else that they can actually comfortably communicate to. So we're so far away from that point. It's just not going to happen. But the research that's out there is also quite deficit based in the sense that it matches itself up against English. And so English has billions of dollars of resources across 190 odd countries that go into it every day, and all of that language permeates out into society. So it's sort of like comparing apples with oranges, but it's also like comparing two things together in a way that's just utterly so ridiculous you should question why you're ever bothering to do it. And that's what a lot of the research does as well. It kind of says, well, English is doing this and Māori isn't, so Māoris must be dying. But it's like, that's so, in my academic view, stupid, because you just can't compare the two. It's like racing a Ferrari and a little Daihatsu. They're both cars, yep, but like there's just no conceivable logical reason to ever bother, you know what I mean? But academics do, so that gets quite hard.
I find that really interesting that it would be compared to English in such a way, considering all the language has been through the last 100, 200 years, whatever.
Absolutely.
With everything out and all the people out there trying to stop the language even being spoken or passed on, and then to turn around and be like, there's not many speakers. It's like, I wonder why.
I wonder why. It's just so strange. I will never understand that. I call it, when I'm feeling academically racked up, I call it fetishizing for deficit modes of research. Like academics can sometimes be so keen to pursue a deficit because they really want to find one that they'll just stop at nothing to find one. And happens a lot in Māori communities, so much so that some of our expert Māori scholars have written lots about deficit research, but we're still in it. But I do think, though, that one thing we don't do well is speaking the language. So we're all going to learn it, and we're all writing posts on Instagram about how awesome it is, and that's good, and it's great. But how many of us are actually becoming part of the fabric of society where we're starting to change our actual language use? I'm not sure that we're doing that great at that part, but I think we could, and I think the way that we get there is the language planning stuff we've talked about in this podcast, and just these kinds of conversations that you and I have had throughout this series of tūkapo te kōrero. It's exposing those things, I think, that allow people to unpack the language and see it as something, oh, I can do that, and that's quite freeing. So that's something I hope people do more, and something that I hope the literature research starts to cover as well, because it doesn't cover that very well.
Do you feel like the output that you're seeing is the most it's ever been right now, or do you think that there was a previous time where that was happening? Because how long have you been speaking for? Since when?
I would have called myself a speaker from like 2010. Yeah, 2011, when I could like sit in it and
know
be
what
okay.
was going on.
No, it's okay, not freak out, like yeah, have a conversation. So like 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. I've definitely observed more people who have made the language like a full part of their lives. Like I still remember the first time I went to the supermarket here, and I saw a family speaking te reo Māori, and I didn't know who they were. And I was pretty sure up until that point that I knew all of the people who could do that in my region. I was like, there's no more families left to meet who know enough te reo Māori to be raising their kids in it. I know them all. And then I didn't know them all. And at first I was shocked. Like, oh my gosh, do I actually know people? Like, do I know people?
Are they from out of
Is
town?
it me? Yeah. And then I was like, no, wait, this is awesome. Like, this means that people who are outside of my social network, who I thought was, everyone that I possibly knew was in my social network. I knew all of those people who could speak Māori, and all of a sudden I didn't anymore. And now I don't know anyone. And that makes me so happy, because, I can go down to the supermarket on any given day and I'll hear someone speaking Māori to their kids, and I have no idea who they are.
Cool.
And that's awesome. And I don't remember that growing up, and I don't remember that when I first started learning either.
I love that.
I mean, what a sign of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And then there's Taua,
Yeah.
chilling in our lounge.
I definitely feel like we use a lot more te reo in our home life. Even out and about, even just like simple like greetings and things. I just say it without thinking now, and I really love that.
You
Kia
are
ora,
actually
morena, atamari.
you're better at that than I am.
Learn from the best. How do we find trustworthy research on bilingualism? Do we need to get books by Vini Reader? Sorry, Dr. Vini Reader?
Yes, and you need to purchase them through him, so you need to send him money.
Does it cost more to get him to sign it?
Yes, 7 times the price. Yeah.
I'm good. Okay, but no, sorry.
That's I think a really good question, because a lot of the attitudes that we hold around Māori language we think are our own, but they're actually fed to us by a real crap research from Britain and from like the 1930s. And so looking for good research is actually pretty hard, because some of the research that's out there still backs off those opinions, stuff from the early 1900s. So yeah, it's stuff like I taught at an all-week kōrero last week, and we talked a lot about code switching, like moving from one language to another. And some of those people still had that attitude of it's wrong to do that, and that's like 1930s monolingual English Britain wank. Like, it's all wrong. None of it's real. But it's all from research.
Yeah.
And so finding better research is really important if people are going to try and, knock that stuff out the park. And so the first thing that I think is seriously important is that people look for research that's by actual bilingual academics.
Yes.
You'd be surprised at how many researchers are out there who study purely bilingual, multilingual people, but they're not multilingual themselves. And so they come with all of this baggage around, I'm going to look for weaknesses. It's a deficit thing. I'm going to look for weaknesses in these things and I'm going to expose them, and that's how I'm going to maintain my academic integrity, is I'm going to look for the weaknesses.
The Karens of the...
Yeah, it so is.
The language world.
Yes. Yeah, it so is. So, yeah, that's my, I guess my guidance starts there, is if you can't identify that person as a multilingual person themselves, their stuff's not worth reading.
Interesting.
And then from there, a really great tip is, once you land on something that is, you can identify it as good quality, is that you can check its peer review status. So that's another thing to check, that it has been peer reviewed. Not everything that's written about Māori language, when you read it, is actually peer reviewed. It's just random academics that aren't even language academics. They don't speak Māori, but they're writing books about te reo as if they know stuff. And when you go looking for the actual peer review status, that's really important. It's not there. And basically they've just self-published it in their sheds because they can't get it published anywhere else because it's drivel. But when you look for something that has a peer review comment on it, it's usually at the front or at the top or at the start, and it'll say this piece of work has been blind reviewed by 2 other academics or 3 other academics or whatever, who have gone through this work without knowing who the author is and said yeah, or no, or they've challenged them and they've worked really hard to bring it up to a standard where other academics are saying yes, that is a thought that is credible and academically worth putting your effort into. And lots of academic material now in 2024 is not like that. It's just people writing blogs. But even if they're professors, that doesn't make their work credible. What makes their work credible is that other academics have looked over it, read it, challenged, rejected sometimes, and then eventually got it to a point where every word that's written on that page is seen by the community as valuable. Yeah.
Is it always blind reviewed? It's not going to be read by their mates that feel the exact same way and they're like, this is gangster.
It should really be blind peer reviewed. Yeah. So we call it, in the academic spaces where I've edited or, worked in journals, it's called double blind peer reviewed, which means 2 people have read that work cover to cover and commented on it without knowing who the author is or where they work. And then my personal preference is to start with Indigenous or minority language authors.
Absolutely.
I always want to know that they've got a minority language identity. So even some of my best academic colleague friends who are they spend most of their life in English, they have a really strong heritage language identity present in their work, and so I include those people in my bilingual and multilingual canon of people that I like to read. Yeah, that's really important to me.
Is it bad for children to be raised in multiple languages? Won't it slow down their English?
That's a cool academic question to ask. I like that. People will really, really hope that the answer is no. The honest answer is a tiny little bit for a really short period of time, to the point that it doesn't matter by the time they reach puberty. Children who are raised in multiple languages tend not to speak as quickly as a young toddler baby being raised in one. That doesn't always happen, but they tend to be just a little bit slower, and it's because their brains are compartmentalizing grammar out. Brains in babies are just like the most amazing thing that you'll ever see, and communication and how they learn to communicate is just amazing. A lot of babies who are introduced to sign language will be communicating at like a few months old. They can tell you whether they're hungry or not, like it's just so quick. If they're being raised with a spoken language, they'll probably start talking a little faster if there's just one. They might be a few months behind if there's just two, if there's two languages or more. And that's because their brains are like compartmentalizing all that grammar out. Like they've got to learn so much. And that will mostly continue. Like the stuff that I've read anyway of child bilingual development is they'll tend to trail their monolingual schoolmates. Just follow them a little bit behind in terms of their language development, which is where most academics measure this stuff, by the way. They don't measure it in home, which is actually kind of sad. They kind of do it at school and they measure how well children are performing at school. And the ones who are bilingual tend to be just ever so slightly behind in the early years, and that freaks parents out because they think, raising children who have a lower IQ or whatever, but it's actually not. They're just learning to communicate in multiple languages. And a monolingual child doesn't have to do that. After puberty, it swaps and you'll get the exact reverse. So a child who's now, getting towards their teenage years but is bilingual will start outstripping the monolingual child in all manners of school performance that you could possibly imagine. And they just seem to skyrocket. And we see that in Aotearoa here with our kura kaupapa Māori. Kura kaupapa Māori, it's, they're just amazing in terms of what they do on a daily basis anyway. But it's getting so common now, and I don't want to minimise it because it's amazing. It's getting so common now that kura kaupapa and wharekura are churning out 100% pass rates for, NCA and things like that. And monolingual English schools just can't even come close, And that's partly because of the bilingual brain. Just once you hit puberty, it's like, and they're off. But it's not just their school performance. You can actually see it when you hear bilingual orators and how well they manage to encapsulate what they're saying in either language or in any language and really transmit a point using a really specific vocabulary. Sometimes it's really low frequency. And there's a little thing that people can look up at home if they want, and it's called meta-linguistic awareness. And it's about knowing how to know about language and knowing how to communicate that to other people who share the same worldview as you. Multilinguals are just so far ahead because monolinguals haven't had the worldview exposure. They're so limited. They only know this much about their world. They haven't got all of this. And every time someone learns another language, their metalinguistic awareness goes like this. And so you'll find even bilinguals who, grew up speaking Māori, they've been speaking longer than me, the way that they can narrate a boring day is so much more interesting than what I could ever do. And it's because of that trajectory that they've had. So slow for a little, but so much more worth it in the long run.
I know a lot of people who spoke 2 languages when they were really little and then got older and lost one, which was usually the heritage language, and now they only speak English and might only understand a little bit. When you were talking about hitting puberty and that they go off and they do well, would it be the same case for someone to be around puberty, to have 2 languages or to be bilingual, multilingual, and then lose it, like stop speaking? Would they still be able to maintain the language at that point, or is it still going to be lost if they stop speaking or stop being around it?
Yeah, it's super hard, and it's one thing that I guess people would say they'd lost it. I'm not really sure whether they would have lost it as in it's gone. What I do think is that they probably kept developing as a human, but their language didn't grow as well, so they might have left kohanga at aged 5 and had beautiful reo for a 5-year-old, but language keeps developing.
Gotcha.
And they never got that chance. And so I would posit that it's not lost, it's not gone. It's just that their English was able to develop and continue through puberty into adulthood, and their reo didn't get that chance. People don't really have a fluent knowledge of a language until they hit puberty anyway. So I think that's usually what happens. It's they've not had that chance to push it further, which is super sad, and I know that becomes really tough for our kohanga graduate. There's one little part of research that I remember, one publication from an awesome stalwart of the language called Tony Waho, and he wrote something in our book, The Value of the Māori Language, Te Ua o Te Reo Māori, and he wrote that, in his observation anyway, children who leave kohanga and go into English mainstream education will lose that ability to hold that level of language in about 6 months. So, 5, they're yapping away into reo, 5.5, it's gone from their minds. What I don't know is whether that's like gone language or whether that's just that social reconstruction of that person in another society.
What if the language is still alive at home though? Does that change anything?
Yeah, I would say that changes probably heaps. And that's provided that the language exposure at home is like super positive and super full to raise bilingual babies from the start, which not many people will be doing who are our kinds of listeners. They'll be like us, they'll be people who are on a 4-generation journey.
What does the research say about people like me and you, multilingual couples?
You and I are one parent, one language families, probably at the outset. And one parent, one language, OPOL, is it's something that Māori communities have almost been told not to do through linguistic oppression. But we've also kind of been told not to do it by Māori revival communities. We're kind of, I think, led to believe that you should be speaking Māori all the time at home, 100%, everyone. And I understand, like, this is not a criticism, I understand where that philosophy comes from, but it does stop a lot of families from getting started because they can't do that.
It's a lot of pressure too.
It's a lot of pressure, and we don't have the facilities for that. And so a lot of families go, well, I can't, so I won't. I worry that that's a mistake, because overseas you've got millions of bilingual families, like literally millions, possibly in the billions, of families who are not raising bilingual children by saying everything at home in this language now. They're saying, well, I've got this language, you've got that language, can't we just find our middle ground? So if you could have one parent speaking one language, one parent speaking another, totally adequate, great, functional, meaningful way to raise a child in multiple languages. There's just one little kink in that chain for Te Reo Māori, and it's that Te Reo Māori is a minority language. So if one of the parents is speaking English, you also know that English is the language of outside external society. So the amount of English exposure is so much greater when you have that going on outside and having the language in the home.
What's more important, intergenerational transmission or intragenerational transmission?
You did great. People talk a lot about transmitting the language to their kids. All about the kids, everything for the kids. And that's intergenerational, so across generations down. That is true, that it's important. Like it's super important, because we're chasing 3 or 4 successive generations of raising children of Māori. When we are doing that as a family, we will know that we've really made it, because that's the international benchmark of successful language revival, is when you've got 3 or 4 successive generations all doing it, then you know you're good. When I did my PhD, I trawled through 88,000 cells of Microsoft Excel data.
Riveting.
About 12 times or 13 times to look for different things, and I went through all 88,000. That data set came from a really big project called Te Kōrero, which was Professors Arawani Higgins and Poirewe. It was their research project, and I trawled through their stuff. And I saw a lot in there of, well, I'm speaking Māori to my kids, but they're not speaking back to me. There must be something wrong with them. You know, the kids have got something wrong with them. They're not doing what I'm telling them to do. I'm telling them. And that seemed like a lot of speaking down. That doesn't seem very compatible with how we think children's minds work. There's lots of academic literature that kind of says, well, children speak how they're spoken to. They look to their parents. If their parents smoke, they're more likely to smoke. You know, like there's all this research. And so that started getting me thinking about, like, well, do you talk to other people, other adults? Do you know what I mean? One of the things that I don't think people do very well, and that I hope we can do better at, is intra-generational transmission, which is across generations. So our kids need to observe adults conversing in the language in order to understand that it's a language for having conversations in, and it's a language that's valuable for adults. So I need to remember it, retain it, keep producing it. I think that if a child hears a language being said to them, but never across generations, I think if I was a child, I'd be sitting there going, this is just for kids. I'm only going to be a kid for a few more years. I'm not going to remember this. The one I need to remember is the one that they are communicating in. For parents who are in one parent, one language scenarios, what's super important, I think, is that intergenerational and intragenerational transmission are still like they're equal and they're on par. But if you're not able to have it in home, it needs to be a key consideration for outside the home.
We've had a chat about this before, where sometimes when a language other than English, like for me, for example, being told off in Okinawan and, you know, knowing the swear words, knowing how to be disciplined in it, kind of getting yelled at in the language, but not knowing I love you in tokelao, or like that was awesome, or any sort of positive language. In my mind, that language was only for like bad stuff. So
for lots of families who were purely English speaking with a little dabble of other languages, like tokelao, like Māori, it's really common that they just cling to that little negative part, but actually children tend to just associate it with negative things. So if I only had a little bit, I'd be starting with words of praise and words of love. If I had a full capacity, I would be doing everything in Māori, and you would be doing everything English and tokelao, and that's one parent, one languaging. To each other though, I would still be using Māori with you as much as I possibly could. In 2017, one of the language advisory groups pointed out that only 2.6% of homes that could be Māori speaking are. So that means 97% of families that could aren't. Some of the things that are out there in community because of colonization, you know, like things like code switching is wrong, and, you know, putting the S on the end of a Māori word is wrong, and you can't say mokopunas, and all this stuff. That's all comes from a really long line of colonial research, and so we heap a lot of pressure on ourselves for those kinds of attitudes. There's a big part of me that's like, I feel like we maybe make this a bit too hard, and if we look at the other people who are overseas, like they don't even talk about it.
They don't even probably think about it. They just, the output is whatever it is.
It just is what it is. And they just, and it might be because they maybe grow up in that language, so it's a no-brainer. Whereas for us, a lot of us didn't. So we have to make the shift. But I'm still pretty convinced that they're not doing anything too terribly, because their languages are still getting transmitted. So.
Is it different if it's from a predominantly other than English language country?
Yeah, those
Where
big
you,
languages.
like you might have to learn English at school or something like that.
Yeah, big languages.
Yeah.
Languages where they can pick up their kids and take them home to, wherever they whakaaomarama to. They seem to be reasonably chill about it all. I follow one person on Instagram that we'll link it in so people can have a look. He's just started teaching his kids Japanese like 8 months ago, and he was bilingual person, raising his children in another language, his partner's language. I forget what language that is, because it's not the main thing that he posts about. But he started an Instagram account, which was like, I realised that I wasn't teaching my kids Japanese, and I just decided I would. And so he just made an account about it. He's not a linguist like me, not a sociolinguist like me, hasn't had all of this life working in a language. He was just like, I don't really do that, I should. And he just started, and he's awesome, and the kids are like
Loving it.
away. Yeah.
That's so cool.
And I think part of it is it's been stress free for the kids. It's just like hanging out with their dad. Whereas like I know for a lot of us, we heap stress on the kids, and the kids go, whew, stressy, nah. Yeah, maybe we just need to have a little bit of aroha for each other and our different life situations, aroha mai, aroha atu, that kind of stuff. We just have to understand that everybody's family situation is different, and there's an avenue to te reo Māori in all of them.
I feel like a lot of people, if they feel like, and this is just based on things I've read or seen or people I know, that when they've attached in their mind the one way that passing on the language is going to work, and then it doesn't work, it's like they just give up and they're like, well, my child is just never going to speak, so maybe it's me, or maybe it's them, or maybe they need to go and learn it in school or whatever. I don't think all of them will think, well, that didn't work, what else can I try?
I do agree. I think there's a weird cycle, and it's something like, it didn't work, but now that I'm older, I'll just wait until they have kids, and then, because the kids got to do it.
We'll try again next gen.
The kids have got to do it. It's all about the kids. When actually it's not. It's for our mokupunas. It's for our tamarikis. But it's not. It's actually not their stress to carry. It's ours to bear in order to raise them like te reo Māori is just a part of life. Nothing fancy, nothing extraordinary. It's just a boring old language. That's our job. Children crave that safety. So I think it's this weird cycle of too much for me. But I'm going to go back to my 19th class and repeat Māori 101, and I need to go back and do the same thing again. It's like, no, you don't. You need to change tack, do something different. And it just think, man, no, you just need to learn how to brush your teeth in Māori, and you all just need to brush your teeth in Māori. And just do that for 2 months. And then once you've brushed your teeth in Māori for 2 months, go and brush something else for 2 months. Like, brush your hair. Okay, now you can do 2 things. You can brush your teeth and brush your hair. What else around here do we brush? Similar words for polishing the car. So, okay, let's go polish the car. In a year, you can all of a sudden do like 30 things in the language that you couldn't do before. And all of those were fun, and all of those involved the children, and all of those were, involved intergenerational transmission as well. But it's just such a way more freeing, I think, to think about language like that, rather than this constant barrage of, I need to do this, I need to do that. I'm just not sure any of it is helpful. We need better information out there for people to read and think about, and we need freeing information, because a lot of our information that we have out there on Instagram is shackling, and it's constant, and we just need people out there going, yeah, okay, look, here's an article you can read if you want, but you're okay. Put one on today on Mind Your Tongue about code switching. Just reminding you, you're allowed to code switch. It's not a bad thing.
It's not a language law.
Yeah. It's people can look this up too if they want. It's a universal linguistic constraint. Something that is universally true for all spoken languages is that when people pick up multiple ones and hang out with each other, they're going to start mixing them.
Is that where the S comes from?
Yeah. You get Māori, English, mix the two. Mokapunas is okay. You know? There are rules around it. It's a unique skill of multilinguals to be able to code switch properly. And every Māori bilingual becomes an expert at it. It's cool. You can get it wrong. It's got grammar rules. You know? Like, haere ki te whāngai ngā cat. You know, go and feed the cats. Haere ki te whāngai I ngā cat. 99% of bilinguals will immediately register that as wrong, and the other 1% will still be developing bilinguals, but eventually will be like, no, you can't say that. Haere ki te whāngai ngā cat. Haere ki te whāngai ngā cats, and they're okay with that one, and it's because
You've
of
got
the
the
rules.
in there.
Yeah, it's the rules, and that is the same rule as mokapunas, just reversed. Language is reversed. So to take the S off is the same thing as saying haere ki te whāngai ngā cat, which no Māori bilingual will accept that one if they've reached a certain proficiency.
All the old speaking kuia I know will say mokos as well.
Absolutely they do. Yeah.
I feel like mokos came from that generation.
Mokos, yeah. It's a perfectly normal thing to do. It's just that we've decided attitudinally it's not. And it's okay for people to have a preference. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's, you can look it up in literature. It's called syntax agreement. And it's a universal linguistic constraint that all bilinguals, multilinguals will do it. If they're hanging out together. If you went as a native Tokelao speaker to another native Tokelao speaker who didn't really speak English, you would inevitably not code switch as much. But if you get a bunch of bilinguals in the room, we're all doing it.
Even at work, there's been times where some of our real speakers will be speaking in English and then get stuck and they're like, oh, how do I say this word in English? Because even though they're speaking English, it's like their brain is still being bilingual. And then they're like, oh, I can't think of it, so they'll say it in Māori. And I'm like, that's so cool.
It's so cool because everybody is efficient when they communicate. And so multilinguals communicate faster when they're being multilingual because they've got access to all those different syntax bases and vocab things, and they go, oh, English doesn't have a word for this, but I know I've got one that's like right there.
And it's exactly what I want to say or how I'm feeling. And
I just need to pull it out.
English just ain't slapping the way this te reo Māori word is.
It's exactly right. So, yeah, it's just them being their awesome multilingual selves.
Love to see it.
One of the greatest things I learned in my PhD journey was how to change language behaviours and how to change our mindset around language attitudes, especially with regard to our own language, where we can be pretty negative about it all. I hope that in this episode we've shown you how you can do some of that too, just by knowing a little bit about the research that's out there and how to handle it. What sparked in you as you listened to this episode? We would love to know. You can find us on socials, give our stuff a like, share it with your lovers and friends, and check out the links we post to topics we've talked about on the show. We love hearing feedback so long as it's based on a platform of high and reciprocal mana. Approach us as your friends, not as experts. If you're talking to us like mates hanging out in our lounge, we're happy to hear from you. As always, a massive shout out to Te Matawai and the team at Ata, without whom this podcast would not have been possible. E te whare o te Matawai, te whare o Ata, tēnei māua e mihi atu nei. Whakaaomarama lahi lene.